we recap a wild round one of the 2022 NFL Draft for the Baltimore Ravens next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we return here with another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire. Of course, we're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. We're free and available on all platforms. And we're back here on a Friday edition to round out the week. What an episode we have here today. Although, actually, nothing really happened last night, right? There was nothing too big that went on, nothing that I missed. No, honestly, it was one of the craziest, most hectic nights I think I've ever had. And honestly, that's not too big of an exaggeration. The Ravens moving up and down the draft board, moving back into the first round using one of their players, taking a stud at number 14, best player available. We have so much to talk about here today on this show. In the first segment, we're going to be talking about the Ravens' 2 first-round selections in Kyle Hamilton and Tyler Linderbaum. As a little spoiler alert there, talking about those two players, what they mean for the Ravens, their picks, what I thought of them, etc. In the second segment, we'll dive into the Marquise Brown trade. Yes, Marquise Brown going to the Arizona Cardinals. We'll talk about that, the move, what it means positionally for the Ravens, why the Ravens made this move, etc., etc. Then in the final segment, we'll dive into a preview of days 2 and 3 of the 2022 draft. Obviously, day 2 coming here today, day 3 being on Saturday. Of course, we don't put out full episodes on Saturday and Sunday, so we will have the day 2 preview obviously here for tonight, and then for tomorrow, we'll have that same preview here in this episode. So if you want to check that out or continue to watch, I greatly appreciate that. Tons and tons of stuff to get into here. Before we do that, though, if you're here with us on YouTube, you can see my face and my background. Be sure to subscribe to this channel, like this video. We put out daily Ravens content 5 days per week, every single weekday. So if you want to keep up to date with this Ravens team with analysis, opinions, etc., be sure to subscribe. We're looking for 2,000 subscribers as our next goal here on the YouTube page. So I greatly appreciate everybody who's watching and who's already subscribed. And if you're considering subscribing or you do subscribe in the future, I appreciate you as well. Also, though, if you heard this in audio form, so you're listening anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, be sure to follow and turn notifications on so you know when our content comes out. And I greatly appreciate all of our audio listeners as well. It's the same show on both audio and video. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter at KOstrecker34 for draft updates, and also the Locked On Ravens account at Locked On Ravens. So let's dive into this. Let's dive into the really, really hectic night one for the Ravens of this 2022 draft, starting off with their 14th overall selection, Kyle Hamilton. I am over the moon. I am over the moon with this selection. This selection made the Ravens better. People look to his 40 time. They say his 40 time was slow. I don't care. I don't care. Bring me Kyle Hamilton. That's what as the board was falling the way it was. I went on with Bobby Trossett to his live draft show. And we talked, I think, from about after pick 3 happened to after pick 9 happened. And in that range, there were only about 2 friendly Ravens picks, maybe actually only 1. And that was Drake London to the Atlanta Falcons. There were defensive players going off the board, no runs on quarterback. You're kind of thinking, and I was kind of thinking that, all right, this is kind of like a nightmare scenario that we had talked about before. But then the run on wide receivers happens, and there are a bunch of wide receivers taken in that 8 to 13 range. And then finally you have Baltimore on the clock at 14 with the opportunity to snag the best player available in Kyle Hamilton. Is safety a need for this team? Absolutely not. It was not a need. And we had talked about that, and I had talked about that, how I wouldn't draft a safety in this draft unless it was clear best player available. And other people had as well. Spencer Schultz talked about that too here on the show. Kyle Hamilton was an exception for me in that regard, where if he was available at 14, I would have made that move. I would have traded up for Kyle Hamilton, in my opinion. Hamilton is a do-it-all player. In 3 years at Notre Dame, put up 138 total tackles, 7.5 of those coming for loss. He had 8 interceptions. Surprisingly, though, not a sack. He had no sacks, which is a little surprising, but he just wasn't necessarily utilized that way. But, I mean, literally, Hamilton stands at 6'4". He weighs around 220 pounds. He can play on all 3 levels of a defense, and that's what I really, really, really like about him. and he plays up in the box well, can play in deep coverage well. He has an amazing football IQ. He has instincts. His versatility is something that we have talked about here on this show before, about how the Ravens love those versatile players. Hamilton fits that bill and then some. You can get an immediate upgrade from Hamilton or for Hamilton. And I think this now allows the Ravens to be very versatile with their defense. Now the Ravens have Marcus Williams and Chuck Clark and Kyle Hamilton as that safety trio. And I had talked about 3 safety looks last offseason where I thought it would have been a good idea. I think this year you can do that and have maybe Chuck Clark play up in the box a little bit. I think that's something that they can experiment with. But this is a chess piece for Mike Macdonald. Sometimes with a talented player like Hamilton, you just take the talent and you figure it out. Because sometimes if you're drafting purely for just need, and the Ravens don't do this, but if they draft purely for just need every single time, sometimes you're reaching really far. Hamilton was a pure value pick for this Ravens team, a great tackler, someone who is able to really do a lot fitting in the box as well. So he can also play that box role. But I think for him, the way that he plays physically, the way that he is able to do so much, this is a home run pick. I'm almost lost for words. I never expected Kyle Hamilton to be in the situation for the Ravens to take him at number 14 without even moving. They didn't even have to move to get him, where I thought maybe if you fell out of the top 10, you might trade up to 11 or trade up to 12 to get him. But the Ravens do what they do best. They let the board fall to them and they get rewarded for it. The Eagles actually jumping ahead of the Ravens, pick 15 to 13 to take Jordan Davis, a pick that a lot of people thought would be a really clear Ravens pick, and maybe he would have been the selection. But to me, if it was between Hamilton and Davis anyway at 14, I would have taken Hamilton 10 times out of 10. So I give a lot of credit to the Ravens for sticking with their board and getting a player like Kyle Hamilton at number 14. Then the Ravens will talk about the trade that got them this pick in the second segment. But at number 25, the Ravens take Tyler Linderbaum, the center out of Iowa. Now, on the actual draft day show that I did yesterday, I was going back and forth with Linderbaum, and I'd been very adamant, and I still would have been, that I did not want Tyler Linderbaum at number 14. That was a pick that I just wasn't comfortable with. The scheme fit, I still have questions about that. The length, I don't hold that. The size, I don't really hold that against him as much as others do. But I initially said that I wouldn't draft Linderbaum at all. And then I during the show, I kind of thought about it. And I'm like, wait a minute, that's not true. Then I said, all right, well, at 45, he's the best player available. You kind of have to take him. Then I said, wait a minute, I'm probably taking him a bit earlier. So I said, in a trade back scenario, I would take Tyler Linderbaum or Trevor Penning. It was kind of talking about both players. And this is technically what happened. The Ravens traded back into the first round with one of their players, Marquise Brown, and they get Linderbaum at 25. Now, was he the pick that I wanted there with the players available? No, I think Jermaine Johnson probably would have been the better pick there, as a lot of other people do. Does that mean I hate the Linderbaum pick? No, I think it's a fine pick. I'm content with it. I'm not mad at it. The Ravens put up some great smoke screens, though. John Harbaugh talking about how they felt confident in their centers and everything. Eric DeCosta talking a bit about it, too. So, I mean, you have to give the Ravens credit for those smoke screens. They threw me off. They threw me off. I'll admit they got me there. But Linderbaum is a player. Obviously, the size is a bit of a concern for some. He stands at around 6'3", 292 pounds. He's somebody who is a physical player, can sometimes struggle against bigger players on the defense just because of his size, but he is someone who is a great athlete, can get to the second level, wins one-on-one matchups. He puts himself in those positions. Very smart football player as well, has a ton of tools that are already developed and more that can develop even further. Now, the zone he is best the best fit in my opinion, is the wide zone. And that's what a lot of people have talked about. The Ravens, they might have to go to a little bit more of that zone with Linderbaum there, because just how can he play in a system? He's not just that zone fit. Like, he's not exclusively there. But for me, I think that we'll see what they do with switching up their scheme a little bit. Maybe they do that. Maybe they don't. We'll see what ends up happening. But for Linderbaum, he is just, he's the best center prospect to come out in years by a lot of different people. Graded out as one of the best center prospects to come out in recent seasons. And this is an Iowa Hawkeyes team that has produced a lot of quality offensive linemen. You might have heard of one of them, actually. His name is Marshall Yanda. Very, very familiar face among the Baltimore franchise. He turned out pretty well, didn't he? So maybe Linderbaum can have a career alongside Yanda. Potentially there will be no Marshall Yanda, right? Marshall Yanda is one in himself, and maybe Linderbaum can try to live up to the potential that he has. And I think that in this Ravens system, it'll be an interesting fit. It's definitely not the perfect fit. maybe a lot of people, myself included, were overblowing the scheme fit, and we'll get to week 1 and it'll be fine. But the center position, this is a position that the Ravens haven't really invested in overall very highly in recent seasons. Another reason why I didn't think they were going to take him, because they haven't really invested high draft capital or big money in the center position. But this kind of changes that. The Ravens have been kind of fluctuating through different centers and rotating through them, but this gives them a solid option there. I'm assuming he's going to take over the starting job, and now we will see what ends up happening there. So the Ravens get the best safety in the 2022 class, the best center in the 2022 class, and don't worry, we're going to be talking about those guys for a very long time here on the show, diving into their skill sets, their play, their fit, and much, much more on Locked On Ravens throughout the coming months here on the show. So be sure to stay tuned for all those episodes. We got a ton of stuff coming up, but also still a ton of stuff to talk about in this episode of Locked On Ravens. When we get back, we'll be diving in to the Marquise Brown trade. So be sure to stay tuned for that. Still a ton to talk about here on Locked On Ravens. So first, let me tell you a bit about Shady Rays. Shady Rays is an independent sunglass company that gives you the features of $200 sunglasses for a fraction of the price. That means polarized lenses, well-constructed durable frames, and premium high-end finishes. Also, something you won't want to find anywhere else is Shady Rays and Stain Protection Program. Shady Rays includes lost and broken protection on every pair. They'll even send you a brand new pair if you lose them, no matter what happens. So if you've lost them at the beach or ran over them with your car, like I may or may not have done in the past, you can have that protection plan for you. Plus, 10 meals are donated to fight hunger in America. When you shop with Shady Rays exclusively for our listeners, head to shadyrays.com and use code LOCKEDON to get 50% off 2 or more pairs of polarized sunglasses. That's code LOCKEDON for their best deal of the season. 50% off for 2 or more pairs of Shady Rays sunglasses, backed by over 150,000 verified 5-star reviews. We're back here, our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still here with you again. Thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. Please subscribe to this channel, follow along in audio form as well if you're there in audio form. But we still have a ton of great content here on the Locked On Podcast Network. I hopped on the live draft show to talk about Kyle Hamilton and Tyler Linderbaum. That is still continuing on the Locked On Podcast Network. There will still be live coverage of the 2022 NFL draft. So be sure to check that out on the Locked On NFL YouTube. But speaking of that live draft show, I had just gotten done talking about Kyle Hamilton. I just finished that segment up. You know, they put me on, they asked me the questions, I answered the questions, and then I got off, and in my ear, you know, I was told, hey, all right, cool, we'll see you again at pick 23. And I'm like, what are you talking about? What do I care about pick 23? Like, who even holds that selection? And then I was told, oh, in case you didn't know, the Ravens just traded Marquise Brown to the Cardinals. And I'm like, okay. All right. I was shocked. I think I was visibly thrown for a loop, and I think I think that could be seen. But it's crazy to think about how the timing of all this works. And I'm not as shocked as thinking about it. I'm not as shocked as I was when the trade first went down, but it was just like, oh wow, like this really, really did happen. And now we do know that Marquise Brown did request a trade at the end of the 2021 season. Eric DeCosta did confirm that. It was kind of hard for him because Marquise Brown was his first ever draft selection. And to have that kind of be how Marquise Brown's career in Baltimore ends, I think was a little tough for DeCosta. But the Ravens trade Marquise Brown and pick number 100 to the Arizona Cardinals for pick number 23. And this is a move where the Ravens, obviously, if Marquise Brown requests out and he's unhappy, it just makes sense for both parties to move on, right? You don't want to have that kind of fractured relationship. But there's no denying the impact that Brown did have on the Ravens organization over his 3 years with the team. He's a player that became the Ravens' first 1,000-yard wide receiver in a very long time. He's a player that added to his game each and every season, still had a couple things to work on in Baltimore, right? The drop issues, the consistency with those were a big factor there. But to me, it now puts the Ravens back into, at least positionally wide receiver wise, it's a big need again. After I think a lot of people have finally come to terms with, all right, wow, the Ravens don't need a wide receiver anymore. They finally have this young duo of Marquise Brown and Rashad Bateman, Devin Duvernay, James Prochet, Tylan Wallace, other young contributors. And all of a sudden, it becomes a need again. And the Ravens will talk about how they could address that in a couple minutes. But just the overall trade of Brown in general, I think for the Ravens, it's a move that was shocking more so because of just, I think, the timing of it. And then also seeing him going to the Arizona draft, like him already being in Arizona to go to the draft party, the Arizona fans are chanting, Hollywood, Hollywood. And it's like, oh, wow. Like it all happened so quickly. And obviously with him already being there, the deal had to be agreed upon beforehand. And there was a lot of controversy surrounding a tweet from Lamar Jackson. Obviously, and Lamar Jackson and Marquise Brown, very, very, very good friends. And Eric DeCosta did say that he and John Harbaugh talked to Lamar Jackson about this move. And this wasn't like the Ravens forcing Brown out, right, and saying, well, this isn't a good fit, we're done. This was Marquise Brown saying, I don't want to be in Baltimore anymore. And so, that's something that the Ravens, they had to deal with. And so it wasn't necessarily them taking away a weapon for Lamar Jackson. It was a weapon of Lamar Jackson's wanting to leave on his own right. And that's up to him. He's allowed to have those feelings. He's allowed to not want to be somewhere, and whatever happens. But I think the value the Ravens got for Brown was very good. For a first-round pick that has played for 3 years and is going to probably get a very big contract, to have that turn into a first-round pick, which ended up turning into Tyler Linderbaum, who you now have for at least 4 years, pending the fifth-year option, that's pretty decent, all things considered. But now you look at the roster, and with Bateman, Duvernay, Prochet, Wallace, right? Those are the four. I'd anticipate the Ravens drafting one wide receiver and signing one wide receiver, a veteran-type player. Now, not a Sammy Watkins veteran-type player, someone who can contribute more immediately in this offense. Potentially a guy like a Jarvis Landry, maybe a Julio Jones. There's been speculation about if the Ravens could make a deal for DK Metcalf or Deebo Samuel. I feel like it's possible, but not likely, in my opinion. I feel like the Ravens, part of the reason, not part of the reason, because I don't think they really wanted to trade him deep down, but let's face it, Marquise Brown is going to have a huge extension on the horizon for himself. He does already have it right now. And there was a lot of speculation as to, all right, what is Marquise Brown worth with the receiver market going up and up and up and up? Marquise Brown probably is going to make around $20-25 million per season. I think he's earned a lot of that money, but again, for the Ravens who have to pay Lamar Jackson, they're already paying a couple of other guys as well, another few guys on the horizon after Jackson. You got to wonder, just like, who can the Ravens keep? And now with this Marquise Brown trade request, you're going back now 3 straight off seasons where an offensive player has requested out of Baltimore. Now, the Orlando Brown situation is a bit different. That wasn't necessarily unhappiness with the offense in particular. It was more of, this was his dad's dream for him to play left tackle, and that, it makes sense there. But you have Hayden Hurst, then Orlando Brown Jr., and then now Marquise Brown. 3 straight years of an offensive player requesting out of Baltimore. That's not a trend you want. That is not a trend you want. When we talked about Joe Flacco, we talked about consistency with the offensive coordinators, right? When he was going through offensive coordinator after offensive coordinator for Lamar Jackson, he's had a couple of consistent pieces next to him, right? Mark Andrews has been there for a long time, but you have other guys just rotating in and out of this offense all the time. Ronnie Stanley, he started with Lamar Jackson, but then he's been injured. So that's someone who hasn't been on the field with Lamar for a couple seasons now, 1.5 seasons now. Marquise Brown now out of Baltimore. Rashad Bateman entering his 2nd season there. The offensive line has gone through a bunch of shuffling. So you want to have those consistent pieces, not necessarily a player asking out every offseason. So that's something I hope dies down for the Ravens and they don't have to deal with another player requesting out. I feel like that's something that's a little bit, it's tough. But at the same time, again, if Marquise Brown didn't want to be in Baltimore, that's just it's good the Ravens and Brown parted ways when they did before it got super, super toxic, right? And there have been other things with Marquise Brown in the past, like him scrubbing his Instagram with the Ravens the Ravens Instagram posts and the pictures. That apparently was something. Maybe it wasn't all things considered, but now it looks like it was something. Maybe Brown will provide some insight into that, but Brown is also a player that Steve Smith had some very, very harsh words for last night when talking about Brown in the trade, saying that he's someone who can't get off press and everything. So that's another aspect of that where there are certain flaws to his game, but Brown was the number 1 wide receiver in Baltimore. That's what he was. Now, I have preached and I have said that Marquise Brown in the ideal offense is a star number 2, like a top of the bunch number 2, like a top 3 number 2, let's say, like a top 3 number 2 wide receiver in the league. I think that's not a bad thing. That's not me trying to say, oh, Marquise Brown is terrible, never have that wide receiver 1 potential. He does have wide receiver 1 potential, but in an ideal offense, Marquise Brown is my top flight wide receiver 2 guy. And that's fine, but are you paying a wide receiver 2 guy, top flight wide receiver 2 guy, $20 million? We'll see what the Cardinals end up doing there. I mean, DeAndre Hopkins is obviously there in Arizona. You got Rondale Moore there as well. Now Marquise Brown. Brown is a very talented player. He deserves a lot of money. I know. But at the same time, could the Ravens have given him that money? Would it have turned toxic? You don't really know. Plus, it apparently seems like he was not happy with the offense. He liked to tweet about him escaping Greg Roman. So that's a clear indication that, yeah, maybe the offense was a key part in the trade request, which I honestly am thinking it was. So the Ravens now go back to the drawing board at wide receiver. There are still options available on day 2. We'll talk about those in the final segment. But Marquise Brown, after 3 seasons with the Ravens, is no longer a member of the Ravens, being traded to the Arizona Cardinals. And the Ravens do pick up the first-round pick. I do think that's good value. I really do think that is good value. But just I didn't expect it. Like, it was something I wasn't expecting. And I'd kind of thought about it and gone back and forth. We talked with Bobby Trossett about, well, if the Ravens get Deebo Samuel, should they trade Marquise Brown in the package? And, Bobby talked a bit about that. But it just didn't work out. And hopefully the Ravens can move forward without Brown and still be a very potent offense. Their passing offense over the first couple weeks of the year in 2021 did seem to take a step forward. I was very happy with that. So I think for Baltimore, what they can do with that is just move forward, try to find another guy. I do think a productive veteran would be a solid option, especially because now you're going to be relying. So the Ravens have gotten rid of their 2 2019 wide receivers, the 2020 or the 2019 draft wide receivers, in a span of about a week or so. Miles Boykin and then Marquise Brown. So now what does the Ravens wide receiver room look like? It's 2 second-year receivers, two third-year receivers. That's young. That's a very young receiver room. So Julio Jones, a Jarvis Landry, right? Some of these players who are still in the free agent market and still could make an impact. Odell Beckham Jr., although he is coming off the ACL, so you got to wonder about that. But one of these veteran receivers, I think, would do a really good job. But I do think, again, not necessarily a lower end free agent signing where it's like a veteran minimum deal. I'd throw a couple million and see what ends up happening. I think the Ravens now, the move freed up a little bit of cap space for them, and what they can figure out with that is, whatever they can. But to me, wide receiver does become a much bigger need than it did just a few hours ago, 12 hours ago. So that's something that's really crazy to think about, how so much can change in such a little amount of time. And literally, the Kyle Hamilton pick gets announced, and then the Marquise Brown trade pretty much gets. I don't even know when it was announced because I was on the live show. So I'm assuming it was pretty quickly because I was literally caught blindsided by this move. So it's the end of an era in Baltimore for Marquise Brown. Lamar Jackson then tweets out the cryptic tweet that got a lot of attention, and that happened right as the Linderbaum pick happened. And then he had to go on Twitter and clarify that it wasn't the Linderbaum pick he was talking about. Like, come on. And so it was a hectic, crazy night for the Baltimore Ravens, but they do pick up 2 very quality prospects in Kyle Hamilton and Tyler Linderbaum. I think the Hamilton pick to me is an A+ all the way. Linderbaum for me is more of a B minus, just because there were positions of need available with I think a couple better prospects. Jermaine Johnson being one of those. That would have been my ideal pick there. But again, I do not hate the Linderbaum selection. And I said before, even though he wasn't my favorite at number 14, if he is drafted by the Ravens, I do think that he has the potential to be a very good player in this offense. I said that multiple times throughout the draft process. And I'm glad I kind of corrected myself, self-corrected myself throughout yesterday's show, talking about, they shouldn't take him to maybe 45 to trade back. I'm glad I kind of went through that process on the show, because look what happened. The Ravens end up getting him not at 14, but at 25, which I think is a much better spot for him on the Ravens. And again, they end up departing, or Marquise Brown ends up departing, but coming in, Kyle Hamilton and Tyler Linderbaum. We'll head into our final break here on Locked On Ravens. When we get back, we'll be diving in to some day 2 and day 3 prospects and positional needs for the Ravens in the 2022 draft. So be sure to stay tuned for that. But before we do that, let me tell you a bit about Built Bar. And summer is coming, and with summer, you're going to need some food on the go. Built Bars are the perfect snack to take with you on family vacations. You can throw them in your bags and your kids' backpacks. You can make sure everyone has a bar, so you're fueled for your summer adventures. And Built Bar, they have these great things called Built Bar Puffs, the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. All Built Bars and Puffs are covered in 100% real chocolate. And the Built Bar, they are healthy, and you can actually enjoy eating it as well. And Built Bars also make sure there's something for everyone. For me, my favorite flavor is mint brownie. They have a ton of other ones, though. I'm a big mint chocolate chip guy, so mint brownie kind of it brings that flavor to me. Most Built Bars contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. Go to Built.com to get all your favorites: banana cream pie, raspberry double chocolate, and so many more. So go to Built.com. Use promo code LOCKED15. Get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. We're back here. Our final segment of Locked On Ravens on this Friday. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still hanging out with you here again. Thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. We're going to talk about days 2 and 3 now. Day 1 it was a whirlwind. It was an absolute whirlwind, but now the Ravens still have plenty of ammunition in this draft. And now their picks have changed a little bit. They did move off of pick 100. They did get, I believe it was pick 130, right? The pick is slipping me right now, but I believe it was pick number 130 for the Baltimore Ravens. Yep, exactly. I got it right. 130 in the 4th round. That means the Ravens have 6 4th-round picks, 6 selections in the 4th round. I don't anticipate that being the amount of picks they end up with. I think they probably end up, I say they probably end up with 5, but I would prefer them to end up with 4 in that round, maybe even 3. My ideal scenario here for the Ravens, there are plenty of talented players still available on the draft board for me. There's Andrew Booth still available, Roger McCreary, Arnold Ebiketie, there's Boy Mafe, a lot of players at these positions of need we talked about, like edge and like corner. They could take Daniel Falele if they wanted to. There are other options as well, but there are enough prospects to me in the draft, or at least at the beginning of the 2nd round, where the Ravens don't have to trade up in the 2nd round if they don't necessarily want to. I think for me, my top 2 selections in the 2nd round would be Arnold Ebiketie, the edge rusher, and George Pickens, the wide receiver. Those 2 players, I think, would be A-plus picks in my book. And there are a couple options they could go with as well. Perrin Winfrey is another option they could look at in the 2nd round. Travis Jones, more of like a defensive lineman type pick. But I think the Ravens have to address edge rusher and corner in the 2nd round. But the Ravens, well, in the 2nd and 3rd rounds, in day 2. The Ravens, they'll only have 2 day 2 picks now. It's not 3 anymore because they moved off of 100. So right now it's 45, then a long wait, and then 76, and then an even longer wait to day 3, or to to day 3, which would be 110. So there's a lot to wait there, but then the Ravens do have those 6 4th-round picks. So what I would do is maybe trade 2 of those 4th-round picks to move up into the late 3rd round. Again, maybe get back a pick in the hundreds or 90s, let's say. If you can trade 110 and 139 to move up into the late 90s, I think that's something that the Ravens should definitely consider, to have 3 day 2 picks, move off one of those 4th rounders and figure it out. And then the other thing would be maybe to move up in the 4th round potentially, so that you have, maybe if you trade 141 and 128 to move up into the 110s or something like that, that's something that could really work out for them. I mean, the Ravens at this point, I wouldn't be shocked if they took 2 corners, 2 edge guys, a wide receiver, 2 defensive linemen, inside linebacker. Well, actually, I'm going to say they don't take an inside linebacker because Kyle Hamilton kind of makes that safety rotation one where they can move Chuck Clark down to the dime or Hamilton down to the dime. So they don't need an inside linebacker, I feel like, at this point anymore. Tight end, running back, etc. So I'd be shocked if the Ravens took a running back or tight end on day 2. I think that's more of a day 3 thing for them, where they will still have options available there. But yeah, I'm on the Ebiketie train. I'm on the Pickens train. There are a bunch of other options as well that could be solid for them. And I mean, when looking at just the class in general, a lot of players who could have been available in the early 2nd round. Daxton Hill goes to Cincinnati. You have a couple of those other players as well. Lewis Seen, who went to Detroit? Did Detroit get him? Someone got him. I can't remember exactly. But that last pick in the 1st round, the Ravens, this 2nd round for me at least is a round that's going to be very important. I still think they don't have to trade up from 45, but to me at least, I think Baltimore put themselves in a very good position because they ended up trading away 100 but getting back 130. So it is about a 30 spot difference. I mean, it's a day 2 pick compared to a day 3 pick. But I do think that for Baltimore, they have options. They can still trade up. I think they probably will trade up here because, again, how how many rookies can realistically make this roster? I don't think all the picks that they have realistically can have an easy time, let's say, making this roster. But I mean, I would not anticipate them taking a safety again. Center obviously is off the board for me as well there. I think that's something that is done. But another thing about the Linderbaum selection, just really quickly, is that this actually allows Patrick McCary, assuming he's not starting, to move back to the super sub 6th row, which that's my favorite spot for him. I'm very happy that Linderbaum's selection probably pushes him back there. Not saying McCary can't start and he isn't talented enough. I do think he is talented enough, but that's just another point on the Linderbaum selection. And something even where like you're looking at what the Ravens have at center now with Tristan Colon and McCary and Linderbaum. Now, Linderbaum is not he's not a player that can play multiple positions. It feels like he is a center. Like he is not someone who can kick out to guard. He's more of the, all right, yeah, we're putting you at center, and that's where you're playing. His skill set doesn't necessarily scream versatility. But at least for me, the Ravens have enough options there where they don't have to necessarily scramble. And I think for now, there's just so many things that the Ravens could look to in the second round. I mean, even a wide receiver like a Sky Moore, or looking at, I don't know, like a Jalen Petrie, I think could be an option. Although with Hamilton, I think that kind of eliminates that need. There's Tariq Woolen as a corner. Raymond is an offensive tackle. DeMarvin Leal is another interior defensive lineman that could do a really good job and I think be a really solid option for them there. Kyler Gordon, a cornerback who was getting some first round buzz, could be an option. And Nakobe Dean, again, I just feel like the inside linebacker need isn't as big anymore. But yeah, a lot of these guys that should be second round picks will probably come off the board here. Then you move into the third round where I think the Ravens, that could be the prime cornerback spot if guys like Kyler Gordon and Andrew Booth do go. If Andrew Booth is available at 45, that's a pick for me. It's Booth, Ibikady, and Pickens. I'm upping it to 3. But the fact that the Ravens were able to get a haul of Hamilton and Linderbaum and still be able to have 45 is incredible. If you had told me that, I would have been like, no way. There's no way Hamilton fell, first of all. And then there's no way the Ravens traded back into the first round without giving up 45. Now, they did have to trade away their number one wide receiver in Marquise Brown, but I still think that for what the Ravens were able to do on night 1 of the 2022 draft, they set themselves up very well. So again, my draft grades: an A for Kyle Hamilton, a B minus for Tyler Linderbaum. The Marquise Brown trade, I'll give it around a B as well for that. So I think the Ravens did a good job on night 1. I'm very excited for night 2 and obviously day 3 of this draft. And we'll be talking about that throughout the rest of the month and the coming months on Locked On Ravens. So be sure to stay tuned for all of that. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. When we get back here on Monday, we'll be diving into a full recap of the Ravens 2022 draft class. So be sure to stay tuned for that. And I will see you on Monday.